We are back again with On The Money Line, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm your host Newsome, and we are, of course, at the Apex in Vegas here for UFC Vegas 40. Now, I'm a very positive person, and especially when it comes to MMA, I always try and see the positive sides in everything related to this sport, but I do have to admit I am struggling a little bit with this card. I will say this though, I think Aspen Ladd replacing Holly Holm in this main event against Norma Dumont actually makes a better fight, and it's normally these types of fight cards that deliver violence, so that is actually my positive spin on what we have ahead of us this weekend. But just before we get into these breakdowns, as always, there's a few things to mention in regards to MMA Play 365. The last event was outstanding for us at MMA Play 365. All three recommended bets won, with Matheus Nicolau winning a clear decision on the scorecards, Alexander Romanov dominating and finishing, then Damon Jackson's only real concerning moments being a nasty cut in round 3 after comfortably winning the first 2 rounds. From the official bets perspective, Nicolau was played straight on the money line with Romanov and Jackson parlayed, so that was a clean sweep too. The money back guarantee dog of the week was Marina Rodriguez that won a relatively easy decision, and as for the fun gamblers, both pre-made parlays won and 8 out of 10 parlay options won too. Remember, we have multiple packages on the MMA Play 365 website for all the UFC betting advice and DraftKings FanDuel advice you'll ever need. We also have various subscription lengths and options too, so to see our full service list, please go and visit MMAplay365.com for more information or to sign up today. And let's break down some fights in the main event in the women's featherweight division. We've got Aspen Ladd versus Norma Dumont. Ladd is currently the -135 favourite. The comeback on Dumont at +115 as the underdog. As for where the value is on the betting line, I do think the value sits with the underdog in Norma Dumont. It was never really going to happen, but I do think there's arguably a case that she should be a slight favourite in this spot considering everything that's happened around this main event, which I'll touch upon shortly. But yeah, I do think the value sits with the underdog in Dumont at +115. As for where the betting line moves throughout fight week, it's fluctuated a lot, this betting line. Norma Dumont opened a bigger underdog in this spot. A lot of money came back in on her. I think it hit a pick'em at one point as well, and then the money started coming back in on Ladd. It seems to have settled where it is right about now, so I don't think it's going to ping off in any one direction. So come fight night on Saturday night, I do think from a betting line perspective that the odds will be roughly sitting where they're at right about now come fight night on Saturday night. Now, as for how this fight plays out, there's a couple of things to mention in regards to, again, like I've already alluded to in the introduction to this fight, things that have happened for this main event to happen. So Aspen Ladd, by the time she weighs in, it will have only been 2 weeks since she missed weight, since she should have fought 2 weeks ago at bantamweight. She missed weight, then she ultimately had to pull out of the fight due to falling ill, due to the weight cut. So that's only 2 weeks afterwards. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to have a massive effect on this fight because she is having a fight here at featherweight, which is upper weight class, so that weight cut isn't going to be as extreme the second time around. But the fact is, only 2 weeks ago, she struggled to make weight and had to pull out of a fight due to illness because of the weight cut. So that, again, doesn't bode well. The second thing here is, this is Aspen Ladd's UFC featherweight debut. Now, Ladd has fought at featherweight before. It was earlier in her amateur career, though. Definitely nothing professional, definitely not at this level in the UFC, and definitely not for a very, very long time. So Aspen Ladd here is taking a fight on short notice with everything that happened regarding the last weight cut 2 weeks ago, and she's upper weight class, and she's fighting a really big woman in Norma Dumont. Now, I don't mean Norma Dumont's going to be much bigger in regards to height and length and reach and all that sort of stuff. Just in general, she's a really heavy featherweight. She's going to be physical, she's going to be strong, and she's going to be bigger than Ladd as they're in the cage on Saturday night. So of course they're going to weigh in at the same weight, but Norma Dumont will put that additional weight back on, and she will be much heavier, I think, inside the cage than what Ladd will be. Now, for me, Aspen Ladd's the slightly better mixed martial artist pretty much everywhere, but I don't think there's a massive significant edge in each discipline. So I do think that Ladd's the better striker. I do think she's the better wrestler, the better grappler. That's the one where I'm on the fence on. But like I said, I don't think there's any great edge. I think Norma Dumont is also a very good striker, a very good wrestler, and I think she's a very good grappler as well, considering the styles match really well here. But then you add in the physical advantages on top. I think the fight does favour fighter, Norma Dumont. Now, I do think that this fight could be relatively close. I definitely think it's going to be one of those fights that if it does go to a decision, we might be there looking at it thinking, okay, which way has it gone? But I think Norma Dumont's going to be able to do enough. Like I said, I think Ladd is going to have moments, and she is the better fighter in most areas of MMA, but Norma Dumont's physicality, I think, is going to play a factor, because I'll give you an example. If Aspen Ladd's coming on strong and she's really applying pressure with her striking, I think Norma Dumont will just tie up with her, push her against the cage, grind away on the cage, run the clock down a little bit. That'll look better in the judges' eyes, because although she's not doing a lot, it's going to look like she's in control. And the thing is with Aspen Ladd, in a lot of her fights, she relies on, if it's not quite working on the feet, she'll just drop down for a takedown, try and take her opponent down, and she's really good on top. But I think Norma Dumont's going to be really difficult to take down, again, just because of the size of her. I don't think it's going to be easy. I don't think Ladd's going to be able to get many takedowns, and if she tries to take Dumont down early in this fight, she's going to be made to work. That's going to drain a gas tank a little bit. How she looks further down the fight, with this being 5 rounds, I'm not too sure. And I just think that Norma Dumont is the more likely fighter to come on strong later in the fight if things aren't quite working for Aspen Ladd. I like Norma Dumont as a fighter. She's really aggressive with her striking as well. So with Aspen Ladd, again, in previous fights, she's been able to be the aggressor, be the bully inside the cage, back her opponent up. I don't think you're going to get that from Norma Dumont. I think Dumont will stand her ground. I think if Aspen Ladd tries to get aggressive, as I've said, Dumont will stand her ground, plant her feet, and she'll fire back. And again, it's going to make Aspen Ladd start questioning things inside the cage. I think Ladd is going to be the fighter that has to make the in-cage adjustments. Whether they're the right adjustments or not, I'm not too sure. But the only real concern from Dumont's side is when she was taken down by Felicia Spencer, which, by the way, I think that's a fight that's not spoken about enough. That is a phenomenal win against Felicia Spencer. But yeah, in that fight, Dumont was taken down late and she didn't look to have too many answers off her back. So that is a bit of a concern. If Ladd can get on top of Dumont, then Ladd will work on Dumont, in my opinion. Ladd is quite good in regards to her BJJ positioning, transitioning, and a ground and pound, whilst looking for submission attempts, all that sort of stuff. I do think that's where Ladd is going to have the most success. But as I've said, I don't think Dumont's going to get taken down easily. I genuinely think the size, the strength, and just how much bigger Norma Dumont's going to be inside the cage is going to play a factor in this fight, along with Dumont also being good across the board in regards to every discipline in MMA. I am going to be picking Norma Dumont to win this fight. And in the next fight, in the co-main event, we've got Andrei Arlovski versus Carlos Felipe. Felipe is currently the slight minus 115 favourite, with the comeback on Arlovski, the slight minus 105 underdog. As for where the value is on the betting line, it's one of those fights where the odds are so close, and I think they're going to stay so close that if you have got a good read on either side, then either side is absolutely playable. As for where the betting lines move throughout fight week, as I've just mentioned, I don't see the betting lines moving too much. I think these odds are going to roughly stay where they are. We have seen fluctuation in regards to Arlovski flipping to the minus 115 favourite, then Felipe flipping back over to the minus 115 favourite, but I just don't think it's going to ping off in any one direction, and ultimately it could end up a pick'em come fight night on Saturday night. Now, as for how this fight plays out, it's a really interesting fight because it looks like the UFC like Carlos Felipe. They like what they're seeing from him. He is an exciting, entertaining heavyweight to watch. He's a little bit of a different character as well. So I think the UFC are just giving him the test that's Andrei Arlovski, which a lot of these up-and-coming fighters don't tend to pass this Arlovski test, whether it's a controversial decision or not. Arlovski is, in my opinion, that gatekeeper for prospects coming into the UFC, looking to get into the top 15 rankings. If you beat Arlovski, then you've got a great chance of being ranked, but if you don't, then it's time to reset and go again. And I think that's the test they're giving Carlos Felipe here. And the reason Arlovski is that type of fighter is because he has this weird ability to just slow down a fight, make the fight play out at his pace. That allows him to get his range, get his distance management, and strike when he needs to. Of course, fighters give him a good go and he can be cracked, and that chin seems to have been repaired after a few years back where seemingly he was getting knocked out by everybody. So Arlovski is this sturdy veteran that isn't the explosive, aggressive knockout artist that he used to be. Just like fighters like Junior Dos Santos, at heavyweight, these fighters do have to change the game plan once that chin starts to be checked a few times, and Arlovski is a current UFC fighter with that style. And in this fight, if Carlos Felipe falls into that trap, then I do think that Arlovski at a slower pace is going to be the better fighter with a veteran experience edge over Carlos Felipe, that even if the fight's close, the judges are probably going to score it Arlovski's way anyway. But I don't think Felipe has that about him like other fighters have against Arlovski. Felipe's a bit more entertaining, is a bit more exciting, and he won't be in a boring fight. And what that means is Felipe will be aggressive, he will come forwards. If it means eating a couple of shots from Arlovski, he's durable. You don't want to over-rely on that as a heavyweight, but he's durable enough to take Arlovski's shots, come forward and land his own and make this fight exciting. And that's the way to beat Arlovski. If you play at Arlovski's pace and his speed and his range, then Arlovski's going to have good moments and a good possibility of winning the fight. But with Felipe, I think Felipe is going to want to be in Arlovski's face, even if it means him taking a couple of hard punches moving in. And that is going to be the difference for me. I think Felipe is going to land volume. I think he's going to be the quicker fighter, the fighter that's landing the bigger action strikes as well. And it's for those reasons I'm picking Carlos Felipe to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got the veteran Jim Miller versus the newcomer Erick Gonzalez. Jim Miller is currently the minus 225 favourite. The comeback on Gonzalez at plus 185 as the underdog. As for where the value is on the betting line, I think the betting line's a little bit off, but it's not far from being accurate. I do sort of get why Jim Miller is sitting at minus 225, but if you are going to push me for a value side, I would say there's more value on the plus money underdog than there is of the minus 225 of Jim Miller. As for where the betting line moves throughout fight week, Jim Miller did open a little bit of a shorter favourite. The money's come in on Jim Miller and it looks like the line has settled where it is now, so I would be surprised to see Jim Miller ping off at a minus 250 or a minus 270 favourite, but I'd also be surprised for that line to come down to minus 185, minus 190. I think it's going to be roughly sitting between minus 200 and minus 225 come fight night on Saturday night. Now, as for how this fight plays out, Jim Miller's got to be careful here. He does have some really good advantages, solid advantages in this fight, but Miller's got to be careful that he doesn't fall into a trap of this fight becoming exciting and entertaining, because that's where Erick Gonzalez is really going to put it on Jim Miller. His striking's decent, it's fast, he fires out in combinations, he mixes things up well between his punches and his kicks as well. So if this fight turns into a little bit of a war, or if Jim Miller slows down, which he is known for nowadays, he is definitely the better fighter in round one, but come round 2 and round 3, if Gonzalez is still fresh and he's given Jim Miller a good first round, then you are going to be concerned if you're holding a Jim Miller ticket for sure. But where I see Jim Miller really taking advantage in this fight is Gonzalez can get pinned up against the cage and he can ultimately get stuck against the cage as well. So if Miller does adopt a clinch heavy approach in this fight, just close the distance, clinch up with Gonzalez and push him back to the cage, I think there Jim Miller's going to be able to do some decent work, get good head position, start landing some dirty boxing strikes. But what Jim Miller does really well against the cage is he works his underhooks and he starts sneaking round to the back of his opponent, and from there he can sink one hook in, get the fight down to the mat and choke you out. I think this is where Gonzalez is going to have problems in the first round, because Jim Miller can push him up against the cage. Jim Miller is still quite physical and the jiu-jitsu difference is just astronomical. Also, Gonzalez can be taken down as well. Not easily, but he can be taken down. Jim Miller's really sneaky with his wrestling anyway. But that's round one. I think Jim Miller could potentially get Gonzalez out of round one. However, if he doesn't, the longer this fight goes on, you have to favour Gonzalez, because Jim Miller, at his current age, with the amount of fights he's had, he's a veteran, he's a legend. I'm sure he's going to be entered into the UFC Hall of Fame as well, but unfortunately, he does struggle after round one. So if Gonzalez is still fresh and he's coming on strong, then Gonzalez is going to win the latter stages of the round. He could potentially find a finish as well. Again, if he's got that gas tank to continue his speed and his movement and create this exciting fight. But I do think that Jim Miller, again, like I've said, I think he's going to be able to get this fight down in round one. And I do think the jiu-jitsu difference is the biggest gap in skill in this fight. So for those reasons, I am going to side and pick Jim Miller to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Manon Fiorot versus Mayra Bueno Silva. Fiorot's currently the minus 225 favourite. The comeback on Silva at plus 185 as the underdog. As for where the value is on the betting line's relatively accurate, but I do think that the minus 225 of Fiorot is a better bet than the plus 185 of Silva. As for where the betting line moves throughout fight week, this betting line for Fiorot has tried to get up there. It's tried to get to minus 240, minus 250, but it appears that that's a bit of a brick wall around that betting line. As soon as Fiorot starts getting some money coming coming in on her. From minus 225, the money comes back in on Silva. But then on the flip side, as soon as it gets back to minus 125, the money's coming back in on Fiorot. So I do think the betting line's settled where it is, and come fight night on Saturday night, I don't think the betting lines will have moved too much. But as for how this fight plays out, it's going to be an interesting fight because I think that both fighters are really good on the feet. I think they're really good on the ground as well. So both fighters are very well rounded, but I think Fiorot just edges this fight because of the difference on the feet. So I think on the mat, Silva is probably the slightly better grappler, but I don't think there's too much in it. Whereas on the feet, although Silva can strike, I do think that Fiorot is a level above Silva, and I think that's going to be the difference. On the feet, Fiorot's really aggressive. She switches stances. Her Muay Thai's solid. She'll throw kicks, she'll throw knees to the legs, to the body, to the head, and then she'll burst forwards with aggressive bursts, firing short punch combinations straight down the pipe. When the fight enters the clinch, she's looking for a plum clinch. She's looking to land elbows and knees. She's just a really aggressive striker, and I feel that she's a lot to deal with. Now, from Silva's perspective, Silva can really get a striking going if she's the one moving forwards, if she's the aggressor looking to bully her opponent. Moving backwards, it just doesn't look like Silva's the same fighter. And again, this is the difference, because when Fiorot has her moments of moving backwards, she can strike moving backwards, and then once she starts striking moving backwards, that allows her to build a platform to start moving forwards again. Whereas with Silva, it's different. When she's moving backwards, she looks a little lost. The striking defense is a little bit suspect as well, and I think that's where Fiorot is going to really push on and have a huge advantage in this fight. I think it's going to make Silva shoot takedowns. Again, I think Silva's wrestling and her ability to get the fight down to the mat is okay, but I don't think she's going to be able to get Fiorot down, and if she does take her down, I think Fiorot will just be able to pop right back up to her feet, and then from there, guess what? The back in the clinch, that's where the elbows and knees will come from Fiorot, where she's physical and dominant inside the clinch. So this is why I think that stylistically, it's not a great fight for Silva. I really like Silva as a fighter, but I think Fiorot is something special, and I think she is going to get the biggest win of her career on Saturday night. I'm picking Manon Fiorot to win this fight. And in the next fight, this should be a fun one. We've got Julian Marquez versus Jordan Wright. Marquez is currently the minus 245 favourite. The comeback on Wright at plus 205 as the underdog. As for where the value is on the betting line, right now, I think the betting line's accurate. Julian Marquez at minus 245 is probably the slightly better bet than Jordan Wright at plus 205, but with the trend of where the money's coming in and the line widening, it's going to be very close to the line and the value of the line flipping over to Jordan Wright if it gets much wider, so keep an eye on that. As for where the betting line moves throughout fight week, as I've just alluded to, the current trend is the money coming back in on Julian Marquez. I'm not sure I totally agree with that at this betting line, that it's coming in that much, but if I'm being honest with where I'm seeing the line moving, I do think that current trend continues, and I do think Marquez is going to step into the cage roughly as a minus 275 favourite, with Jordan Wright being around plus 210, plus 220. Now, as for how this fight plays out, I think the initial moments for Marquez might be a little bit awkward because Jordan Wright's got this karate background and he's got a very weird, evasive style of fighting where he will come forwards with bursts of aggression, but when he's moving backwards, when he's defending in the striking department, he can be a little bit hard to get at. So Marquez, I think it's going to suit him better in this fight in the first round just to come out aggressive, and I do think that he will be able to get at Jordan Wright once those reads are in. It might take a couple of minutes. I wouldn't rush it too much if I was Marquez, but I do feel that Marquez is the better mixed martial artist here. From a technically sound striking perspective, Marquez is better. I think Marquez has got more power as well. When it comes to wrestling and grappling, again, I give Marquez a slight edge in those areas, and although they're not great edges, because Marquez is slightly better in every area is the reason why he is a minus 245 favourite. But where Marquez has got to be really careful in this fight, and Jordan Wright could play into this really well if he's smart, is Marquez fades from a cardio gas tank perspective in almost every fight. He's really good for the first 7.5 minutes, and then from there, his cardio does tend to fall off a cliff a little bit. Now, credit where credit's due, Marquez fights through it, never quits on himself, but everything becomes a little bit slower and a little bit more laboured the longer the fight goes on. Now, if Marquez can put it on Jordan Wright early and hurt him but not get him out of there, there, then it might be a case of Jordan Wright's just got beaten up throughout the fight and he's just as tired as what Marquez is later in the fight. But if Jordan Wright can make Marquez work, make him miss on some strikes, make Marquez come forwards more aggressively and therefore miss more in those early stages of the fight, then Jordan Wright could take over definitely later in this fight. But as I've said, I do think Marquez is the better fighter. I do think he's going to be able to get at Jordan Wright. And in my opinion, Marquez has the finishing upside in this fight. And if it does go to the scorecards, then it's likely that Marquez can take 2 out of the 3 rounds. So for those reasons, I'm picking Julian Marquez to win this fight. In the next fight, we've got Andrew Sanchez versus Bruno Silva. Bruno Silva is currently the -155 favourite. The comeback on Sanchez at +135 as the underdog. As for where the value is on the betting line, I love Bruno Silva, but I do think, and it pains me to say, that the value sits with Andrew Sanchez at +135. As for where the betting line moves throughout fight week, all the money's coming on Bruno Silva over the last couple of days. He was hovering around -125, -130, but in the last 48 hours, it does appear that a ton of money's coming on him. He's -155, -150, -164 in other spots, -167, so a lot of money's coming on him. But I do expect that trend just to slow down a little bit. It has been a big jump over the last 48 hours. I do think it's going to slow down. I think money will come in on Sanchez, just drip feed in. I don't think it's going to ping off in any one direction. I think Bruno Silva is going to come into this fight roughly around that -150 favourite. Now, as for how this fight plays out, it all comes down to one thing in my opinion. It all comes down to, does Andrew Sanchez have the right game plan and can he execute it without deviating inside the cage? And if he comes into this fight looking to wrestle Bruno Silva, then I do think that he'll win this fight. I don't think it's going to be easy for Sanchez to wrestle early on. I do think Bruno Silva will provide resistance early on. I think he'll be able to stand back up early on as well. But this is what I'm talking about deviating away from your game plan. Andrew Sanchez has got to understand that if he gets takedowns in this first round, they're not going to come easy. Bruno Silva is going to be able to stand back up. But if Sanchez continues with that game plan down the stretch, the longer the fight goes on, the easier this fight becomes for him. If Andrew Sanchez turns this into a striking fight, then in all fairness to Sanchez, he has improved a lot in regards to his striking. He stood with Muradov quite well for 2.5 rounds before he was eventually caught. But that's the problem. He can be caught, he can be hit, and Bruno Silva does pack power. And even when Bruno Silva tires and gasses on the feet, he is still relatively dangerous. But again, it all comes back to where Bruno Silva is the weakest, where his holes are in MMA, and it does appear that his takedown defense, and when he's on his back in guard, he just struggles to throw up submissions. That's not really his game, and standing back up to his feet isn't too easy either. I think when he fought in M1 Challenge against Artem Frolov, if you watch that fight, I think he was gifted a couple of stand-ups in that fight for inactivity that I'm not too sure about, stand-ups that he won't be gifted in the UFC. So I think that Andrew Sanchez has a very clear path to victory. I'm confident that he follows it. I'm not so confident just because he has developed and improved his striking to the point where he can be really competitive. But what that's going to do, like I said, is leave an opening somewhere for Bruno Silva to crack Sanchez and knock him out. But outside of that, if Sanchez does follow a good game plan, wrestles Bruno Silva, it could be relatively comfortable for him when we look back on the fight, when it's gone down the stretch. I do have to side with the fighter that I think's got the biggest path to victory in this fight. I'm picking Andrew Sanchez to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Danny Roberts versus Ramazan Emeev. Emeev is currently the -280 favourite. The comeback on Roberts at +240 as the underdog. As for where the value is on the betting line, I do think the betting line's accurate where it is. If you are going to push me for a value side, I would say Emeev is the slightly better bet at -280 than the +240 of Danny Roberts. As for where the betting line moves throughout fight week, a lot of money's coming on Emeev over the last 48 hours. Like I was just saying with Bruno Silva, Emeev was sitting at around -225 just a couple of days ago, but now he's pushed up to -280. He's -290, -300 in some spots as well. So that's roughly where I think the betting line's going to settle. I think Emeev is at least going to come into this fight as a -300 favourite. I feel like he's going to be in a lot of parlays even at -300, so it wouldn't shock me if the betting line then see it up to -310, -320, but he's going to be roughly around that sort of price when both fighters step into the cage on Saturday night. Now, as for how this fight plays out, it's very clear where both fighters want this fight to play out. From Danny Roberts' perspective, he's going to want to stand and strike with Emeev. From Emeev's perspective, he wants to get his wrestling going and get on top of Danny Roberts, lay heavy and grind away the fight. Now, I think in the early moments in this fight, Danny Roberts is going to be really dangerous. Now, he has got a lot of knockouts to his record, but I don't think he has necessarily that one punch frightening knockout power. Even though he can knock a fighter out in one punch, it's not something that I think fighters are going to come into the fight like you would expect with Ngannou. You would expect Ngannou to land one punch and dead somebody, but that's not quite the same with Danny Roberts. Obviously, Danny Roberts is a lot lighter, but you get what I mean. So I think Emeev is going to be able to take the shots of Danny Roberts, although again, it's not advisable, but I do think Emeev's durable enough to take the early damage from Roberts. Roberts early on as well, he's very light on his feet, he's on his toes, he's in and out of range, he's mixing in kicks from the southpaw stance, he'll be firing those to the body of Emeev, who will be an orthodox stance, and he'll be mixing everything up, putting some combinations together, and ultimately, I do think Danny Roberts is going to have moments in the first round, but in regards to countering that, I do think Emeev is a better striker than some people might give him credit for. I don't think he's a fighter with great volume. I don't think he's a fighter that's clean and crisp, but he does react and counter with hard punches, just hard punches enough to gain the respect from the opponent. And the thing is, if Danny Roberts really does start taking over in the striking and really start getting off on some good strikes in round one, all that's going to do is force the wrestling of Emeev even more. And once you force the wrestling of a Russian, a Dagestani-born Russian, the chances are that Dagestani-born Russian's going to get you down. And this is where I really like Emeev, because he has so many different ways of scoring takedowns. So he can use a traditional wrestling style, get you single legs, get you double legs, but he's also got a really good reactive body lock trip takedown where he'll just burst forwards. If his opponent's been a bit too aggressive, he'll quickly wrap the body lock, he'll quickly trip them down to the mat, and then bang, there's your takedown. So from Emeev's perspective, he's got a plethora of ways of getting the fight down to the mat, and that's going to be a problem for Danny Roberts. Now, again, early on, while Danny Roberts is fresh, I think Roberts is going to be able to scramble back up to his feet. Emeev's going to have to be made to work a little bit, but so's Roberts, because I do think Roberts will get taken down and will constantly have to be working back up to his feet. But this is where the big problem comes. Just like I spoke about Julian Marquez earlier, I think Danny Roberts' cardio and his gas tank just falls off a cliff after 7.5 minutes. When Danny Roberts is getting deeper into fights, he does slow down, he becomes a little laboured. And listen, Emeev slows down as well. Emeev becomes a little bit laboured, but Emeev slows down naturally, just like any fighter would fighting. You know, there's not many fighters that look as fresh at the end of round 3 as what they did coming into the fight in round 1. So Emeev does naturally slow down as well, but he should be the better or fresher fighter, should I say, going down the stretch. And I think that once Danny Roberts is tired, even if Roberts takes round 1, I think taking round 1 is going to zap a lot of cardio. Round 2 and round 3, I think Emeev will take over, and that's if Emeev loses round 1. I think the takedowns from Emeev are going to play a massive factor in this fight, and as Danny Roberts gets more tired, the takedowns will become easier for Emeev, and he'll be able to hold Danny Roberts down for longer as well, and that's really key, because the scrambling ability of Roberts will just be diminished when he gets tired. I think it's a good fight for Emeev, a dangerous fight in the early moments, but overall I think when we're looking back at the fight, we'll be thinking that's pretty straightforward for Ramazan Emeev. I'm picking Ramazan Emeev to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Loopy Godinez versus Luana Carolina. And yes, you didn't hear me wrong, Loopy Godinez fighting on back-to-back UFC events. In this fight, stepping up on short notice, upper weight division against Luana Carolina. I love it. We haven't got betting lines for this fight yet. I do expect after her performance last weekend, though, that Loopy Godinez is going to be roughly where Sijara Eubanks was sitting at, around that minus 350, minus 360 line. I think that's where the betting lines are going to open or at least settle. And if we are getting minus 350 for Loopy Godinez and plus 270 for Luana Carolina, I do think that the odds are probably going to be about right where it is. I don't think there's going to be too much value, but I do think, as for where the betting lines move throughout fight week, that money will come in on Godinez, because I think people will throw Godinez in a parlay, and that obviously will just widen naturally the betting line, not by too much. I think Godinez will go into the fight roughly around a minus 370 favourite. But as for how this fight plays out, I actually think it's a good fight for Godinez. She didn't take any damage in her last fight. She looked really good in her last fight. She's going to come into this fight ready confident, on form, and I do think that she's got a style that Carolina is going to struggle with in this fight, and that she has struggled with before. But with that being said, Godinez has got to have the right game plan. I think if Godinez comes into this fight looking to do exactly what she did last week against Gomez Juarez in regards to wrestling, getting takedowns, getting on top, doing work, I think she's going to be able to come into this fight and walk through it. I think the size advantage of Carolina is actually an advantage of Loopy Godinez if Godinez has got that wrestling game plan, because the hips are just going to be closer for Loopy Godinez just to level change and take Carolina down. Carolina's not really too much of a threat off her back. I think what Carolina's got to do, and it's going to be difficult, is try and keep the distance, strike at range from the outside. She is the much taller, much longer fighter, and just try and keep Godinez on the end of a jab. But Godinez is just a little bull inside there. She's a ball of aggression. She'll come forwards. If it means eating a punch or two just to close that distance, she's going to have to do it. But then if she's shooting takedowns, getting takedowns and getting top control time, then those punches that she's eating on the way in will be well worth it, and it won't weigh as much as the wrestling and grappling topside that Godinez will put into that round. Again, I think it's a stylistic nightmare for Carolina, even though this is a short notice fight for Godinez stepping up her weight division. For those reasons, I'm going to be picking Loopy Godinez to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Ludovit Klein versus Nate Landwehr. Klein is currently the minus 340 favourite. The comeback on Landwehr at plus 280 as the underdog. As for where the value is on the betting line, I think the betting line roughly is probably where it should be, but the betting line is heading in a direction where I just think it's going to get out of control here. But the problem is Ludovit Klein is probably, spoiler alert, going to win this fight, so actually betting on Nate Landwehr is probably going to be a losing ticket come the end of the night, even though plus 280 on an underdog betting line is quite juicy for Nate Landwehr, so it's a really awkward betting line. I do think that it's roughly where it should be, but if the money continues to come in on Klein, then I do think the line value will flip over to the underdog in Landwehr. As for where the betting line moves throughout fight week, we've alluded a lot to this already. I do think that the current trend will continue, and it's purely because I think everyone's just going to be throwing Ludovit Klein in parlays, which obviously is a risk when the public are parlaying a fighter that heavily, but it is going to push the betting line out. I do think that at some point Klein might start reaching minus 400, but at that point I do think we'll see some Landwehr money coming back in. Not enough to really close the betting line and shorten it too much. I do think Ludovit Klein's going to enter the cage roughly around a minus 365, minus 370 favourite. Now, as for how this fight plays out, the biggest problem here for Landwehr is he is an aggressive fighter, he's entertaining, and is exciting to watch, but he's just not defensively responsible on the feet when he's striking, and that's going to be a problem against Klein, because Klein is a bit of a sniper, whether it be his head kick that he throws up so fast. The only issue I've always had with Klein, and I said this in the Trezano fight, I actually bet Trezano as a 2-1 underdog in that fight. The problem that I have with Klein striking is it can be a bit predictable. His combinations he tends to repeat over the course of the fight, and if you do make your reads on the combinations, you can either evade those dangerous combinations or you can adjust yourself and counter to those combinations. So aside from that, I do think that Klein is going to be able to land on Landwehr, and that's the key element in this fight, because Landwehr, his head movement just isn't great. He doesn't mind eating a couple of shots to be aggressive and be entertaining, and you know, that's great when you're trying to hit a 50k performance or fight of the night bonus, but it's not great when you're fighting somebody that can snipe away at you and land hard strikes on you, and that's the problem. I think Klein's going to be able to land something on Landwehr at some point early in this fight and knock him out. But if he doesn't, and Landwehr turns this fight into an ugly, gritty, grinding type of fight, then Landwehr could potentially take over this fight the later it goes on. If he's applying that much pressure to Klein, where Klein's constantly on the back foot, it's going to tire him out naturally. When you're constantly on the back foot, your cardio does zap a bit quicker. So Landwehr has got to weather a storm. If Landwehr comes in here defensively responsible, hands up, takes this fight seriously, really seriously from round one, and then is able to apply his own pressure whilst being defensively responsible, this line's going to look way out of whack. But I do think Ludovit Klein is going to land something at some point early in this fight to hurt Landwehr and either start the beginning of the end or just knock him out cold. I'm picking Ludovit Klein to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a man stepping in on short notice, making his UFC second stint. He's returned. We've got Brandon Davis versus Danaa Batgerel. Batgerel is currently the minus 170 140 favourite. The comeback on Davis at plus 150 as the underdog. As for where the value is on the betting line, I do think at minus 170 the value is with Batgerel. I like Batgerel a lot as a fighter. The money's come in on him. He was a bigger favourite. So at the current line, yeah, I do see some value at minus 170. As for where the betting line moves throughout fight week, as I've just mentioned, Danaa Batgerel was a much bigger favourite. It was at minus 200, minus 220 I think at one point. But a lot of money's coming on Davis, and I actually don't disagree with that trend. But what it's done is provided some value on Batgerel. It's shortened the betting line up a little bit. And I actually think that money continues to come in on Davis throughout fight week. When both fighters step into the cage on Saturday night, I wouldn't be shocked to see Danaa Batgerel sitting at around a minus 150 favourite, which means Brandon Davis will be around that plus 130 underdog. Now, as for how this fight plays out, from Brandon Davis's perspective, his path to victory, his main path to victory here has got to be to take Batgerel down, because if he doesn't, I think he's going to be severely outmatched on the feet. Batgerel's striking is clean, it's sharp, it's crisp. He can fight moving forwards, he can fight moving backwards. He's got knockout power, he's got combinations, he's got volume. I love Batgerel as a fighter. Now, for Brandon Davis, he's a gritty, dirty, ugly type of fighter where he'll look to close the distance and just take away any elements of advantages for his opponents and just look to lay heavy on his opponent, whether that be against the cage, whether that be on the mat. And I think unless he does have serious striking advantages, which in some fights he does, in this fight I don't think he does, I do think he will adopt this dirty type of game plan. And I don't say dirty in a negative way, I like that type of game plan when fighters can make things ugly and grind wins out. That's what they need to do to get the win, and that's what Brandon Davis needs to do here. I just don't think it's going to be effective against Danaa Batgerel. Maybe just pinning Batgerel up against the cage and trying to run the clock down, a little like what Holly Holm did to Raquel Pennington, for example. I think Brandon Davis could achieve that, but I do think Brandon Davis has to do more than just that in this fight. And when you try and take Batgerel down, he's not very easy to take down. He's got good takedown defense fundamentals. He's got good balance. If he is taken down, he can pop right back up to his feet. He doesn't just lay on his back and accept position. So I think Brandon Davis in this fight early on may have some good moments making this fight ugly, but Batgerel, I think, will end up finding space in this fight, finding his range, and just really starting to let go with hard shots, hard combinations, and piecing Brandon Davis up. If this fight does go 3 rounds, I think the judges will see that the bigger moments have come from Batgerel. Batgerel is the fighter that's looking like the fighter trying to win the fight, and Batgerel's volume is probably going to outweigh everything else that's happened anyway if there is some wrestling and grappling. And if there is a finish, I think that upside's on Batgerel as well. For those reasons, I'm picking Danaa Batgerel to win this fight. And in the final fight of the breakdown, we've got Ariane Carnelossi versus the newcomer Istela Nunes. Carnelossi is currently the minus 155 favourite. The comeback on Nunes at plus 135 as the underdog. As for where the value is on the betting line, to be honest, I'm seeing more value in the underdog, the plus money underdog at plus 135 with Istela Nunes. I think that Carnelossi's okay, but again, I like what I see from Nunes. I think she's technical. I'll talk about this very soon anyway, but yeah, I see value in the plus money underdog in Nunes. As for where the betting line moves throughout fight week, Carnelossi opened a bigger favourite. She was almost a 2-1 favourite in this fight, but the money's come back in on Nunes. I agree with that trend. The money continues to come back on Nunes. I still agree with that trend, but I do think at some point it's going to stop. If Carnelossi gets to minus 140, minus 145, I think we'll start to see money coming back in on her and the money stop coming in on Nunes. Ultimately, when both of these fighters step into the cage on Saturday night, I expect the betting lines to be sitting roughly where they're at right about now. But as for how this fight plays out, as I've already mentioned, I really like what I see from Nunes. She's got a Muay Thai striking style of fighting. She's got decent takedown defense. She's patient on the feet. She'll plod forward, but she'll be precise, logical, methodical with how she strikes. She's got good punches, good kicks. She mixes everything together well. She doesn't overcommit or overexert herself in fights either. She just keeps her activity levels up, her volume levels up, and she'll just pick away at her opponent opposed to, like I say, looking to take her out of there, which is actually quite the opposite when we're talking about Carnelossi, because Carnelossi's a little aggressive bull in there. She'll come forwards, winging big hard shots, looking to take you out, and she's got a decent all-round game. She's got decent wrestling, she's got decent top control. But I just don't think the wrestling and the top control is going to be enough to take her through to a win in this fight, because I think that Nunes is going to be able to keep Carnelossi on the end of a jab the longer the fight goes on. I think in the early moments, Carnelossi is definitely going to have a moment. She's definitely going to be aggressive and look like she's going to take Nunes out. But I think, like I said, the longer the fight goes on, I do like the clean, crisp, striking fundamentals of Nunes just to start keeping Carnelossi at the end of a jab, getting her range in a little bit better, striking from the outside and moving in when it's not so dangerous. And I think that type of fight is going to be the one that, if this goes to the scorecards, is going to look better in the judges' eyes. I do think Carnelossi's got the finishing upside here, but I do think also that Nunes has got the better chance of winning a decision, and I think this fight will go to a decision. For those reasons, I'm picking Istela Nunes to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of On the Moneyline. I hope you all enjoyed it, and as always, fight fans, I'd appreciate all likes to the video and subscriptions to our MMA Play 365 YouTube channel too. If I've ever helped you win a bet and win some money with my analysis and predictions, then please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Remember, you can get all the betting advice you'll ever need over at MMAplay365.com. We cater for long-term gamblers that like to build their own bets and strategies, gamblers that just want to follow exactly what I bet on, and we also cater for you fun gamblers that like the long shot fun parlays, or ACCAs, accumulators as we call them in the UK. Even if you only want our best value underdog for the event, which comes with a money back guarantee if it loses, we have plenty of different packages and subscription options for you guys to choose from, which also includes our DFS packages for DraftKings and FanDuel as well. All our subscriptions are at very affordable prices too. Just hop on to MMAplay365.com and see what's best for you. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you at the next event.